Hi, everybody. So happy to have you all with us for the Cincinnati Software Craftsmanship end of year celebration. We are so excited to have you with us today, and for all these great speakers to be here. You're in for a treat. First of all, I just want to say welcome. We've had some great meetups this year, and this is really going to end it on a good note. First of all, we'd love for you to follow us on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitch, YouTube, and of course, meetup.com. So that's where we share all of our info and videos. I also want to thank Kroger Digital for sponsoring the meetup, paying for that meetup subscription. And the members, of course. This week, we're going to have free stuff, which is really exciting. And we're going to announce that in just a minute here. Basically, you just type into the chat and you will be entered for those giveaways. We'll be doing those giveaways between the talks. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to type in the chat. Like so, just type in the hashtag CSC. Also, we have some our next upcoming meetup is in January, on January 6th. We're doing emoji and visual communication in a text-based world with Cassandra Ferris. Really excited about this one. Looking forward to it. So, without further ado, let's do this. First up is Sean C. Davis. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, thanks, Michael. All righty.
Take it away.
All right. Thanks. Yep. As Michael said, I'm Sean C. Davis. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting already, I am the Director of Technology for Ample. Ample is a small boutique digital agency located downtown on 4th Street. I wanted to take just a few minutes tonight to talk to you about settling down in a Jamstack world. Now, if you're not familiar with the term Jamstack, totally okay. If you've had any sort of pulse on what's been going on in front-end web development over the last couple of years, if you've played around with JavaScript frameworks, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, before I get to the Jamstack, let's start with what came before the Jamstack to make it all possible. I'm going to call it the old way for now. So the old way was, we'll say WordPress or Drupal or Ruby on Rails or Django, whatever it may be. The idea here being that these were monolithic applications. So everything within your application kind of self-contained, usually in one code base, your front end, your back end, your database, your CMS, your search solution, your authentication solution. It was all packaged up nicely together. And there are a lot of benefits to that, but there were also a lot of challenges. And those challenges kind of made way for the Jamstack to come through. Now, the Jamstack way looks a little bit different. It is kind of a concoction of different tools and services that we stitch together to create one website, one web experience. This is one example I have on screen. So say I have Contentful as my CMS, Gatsby as my static site generator, Netlify is my build and deploy tool, Algolia for search, Auth0 for authentication, and on and on and on and on. Now, there are a lot of benefits to this approach, but I think my favorite is that you get to choose the best tool for each job every time. So if I'm, building a Rails application and I want authentication, well, there's probably a go-to gem or plugin for authentication, and same would go for WordPress, Drupal, etc. But in the Jamstack world, it's great. I can say, hey, here are these different companies offering these products, and they are focused solely on solving this one piece of your greater system. And that's really good. But while it's really good, it's also paralyzing how many choices there are. And even if you feel like you've got a good grasp on the ecosystem today, it's like, who knows what tomorrow's going to be? There could be a new JavaScript framework, a new static site generator, just a new idea that's going to upend everything, solve all of our problems, right? And so I keep coming back to this one question. I ask myself this question all the time. And that is, how do I settle down in a Jamstack world? How do I find a way to be efficient in this new fragmented front end sort of architectural world we find ourselves in? And how do I do that without becoming obsolete? Well, in the last couple of years at Ample, in working with the Jamstack, I feel like we've done this fairly effectively through 3 steps. Step number 1 is we create a starting point. So there are tons and tons and tons of tools and services we could use. Well, let's pick a few that we're going to start with. So at Ample, we said, hey, we really like Gatsby. Gatsby is going to be our go-to static site generator. And so we created a starter kit. And every project, or I should say most projects where Gatsby is well suited to solve the problem that project is presenting, most projects can start from that starter kit. And then from there, step 2, we then work consistently. And once that project starts, that's where we need to create processes so we can work consistently from project to project. And the way we're able to do that is by making those decisions intentionally and then documenting them. And so at Ample, we created this thing we call the Dev Playbook. It's a work in progress, but it's a kind of a hub, a resource hub that our developers can go to see how we do work, essentially. And then as we're building these various projects, we're also at the same time continuing to build up that starter kit by adding new plugins. We solve search for one project. We're like, hey, another project can benefit from that. So we're going to work that back into the starter kit and use it moving forward. And then lastly, we communicate. We make sure that we are always sharing any changes to that core way of working. Our third step was then to maintain curiosity. And this is how I think we've been able to avoid that becoming obsolete. So we set aside time for research and development, and we're able to accomplish that by only billing about 80%, or I should say allocating our devs to about 80% billable, using that last 15, 20% or so to focus on internal projects, research and development, that sort of thing, and to give our developers an opportunity to question why we're doing everything. So make sure that we always have an answer to that question, why. And then when we decide we want to make a change, we make that change in small doses. So we're like, hey, I think we should try something different for authentication on this next project. We say, okay, we'll change that, but we're not going to change everything else so that we can make sure that's working. So those 3 steps have really led us to see a lot of success in this Jamstack world that is so fast-paced and ever-changing. But what I'll leave you with, which I usually end most of my talks with, is never forget to have a little fun along the way, because if you're not having fun, even if you're working efficiently, then what's the point, right? Anyways, thank you very much for having me. I'm Sean C. Davis. I'll look forward to the rest of the talks here and to chatting with all of you on Zoom a little bit later. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sean. We're working on getting that giveaway announced right now. And we're leading into Steve Smith. Steve, welcome. Teach us about endpoints.
Hey, all right. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can hear you great. Thank you.
All right. If anybody has any questions, if you're watching this on Twitch or YouTube later, feel free to post them in the comments. I will try and answer them. To get started, my quick talk today is on controllers, our Dinosaurs, API endpoints for the win. So let's talk a little bit about MVC, or Model View Controller. Quick introduction, by the way, my name is Steve Smith. I go by Ardalis online. You'll find me everywhere as at Ardalis. Check out the slide here. You can see in the upper right corner, there's a GitHub repo that this talk is largely about, called Ardalis/API Endpoints. You can also get it on NuGet.org as the same name. All right, so let's talk about MVC briefly, and we'll talk about it not in the context of APIs first, and then we'll circle back around and talk about APIs. So initially, let's just say that you're working in a big MVC organized project. You're using ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core. MVC has been a thing there for over a decade, and the default organization is typically what most companies build their projects with. And so you might have a project that looks something like this. And so somewhere in your Solution Explorer, there's a controllers folder. It's got a bunch of controllers in it. You maybe have some infrastructure in another folder, maybe another project. You've got a view models folder, perhaps, with a bunch of view models in there, because, of course, you should be using view models. And you bind those view models to your views, which, of course, are going to be in their own views folder. And so when you're trying to work with this, you got to add a new feature. The process is something like, all right, I need to open the controller, and I need to add some infrastructure, update some view models, open some views, find a subfolder, open and create the view that I need. And that's kind of a lot of spelunking around in a bunch of different places. And by the time you're doing all of that, you're like, oh my gosh, this is just so boring, so tedious that I have to do all this. And if you've been doing this for a while on a large project, right, like when you start with a small file new MVC project, it's not a big deal. But when you're doing this on a large project and the Solution Explorer is involved and you've got a lot of scrolling up and down trying to find the right folder, to find the right thing to work on, it gets old fast. All right, so this comic I borrowed from the Dinosaur comic, and they were nice enough to give you a fill-in-the-blank version in the top left panel. But this is kind of how you start to feel after you work on a large project like that. Now, the good news is that out of the box, there are some features that you can use to fix this, right? The first one, of course, you may be familiar with, is called areas. That's been around for a long time. We can say, okay, great. We'll make an area for each one of the different types of things we want to do. And so now when we add a new feature, it's open controller, add infrastructure, update view models, open views, find that subfolder, open and create the view. And it's kind of still the same problem, except now you're only in the areas folder, right? But there's still a whole lot of subfolders and a whole lot of different ceremony and bouncing around between files. And if any of those areas gets large, which it likely will in a big application, then you still have the same problem, only slightly improved. All right, so how is this really better? Now, you can also take this another step further. You can use what's called feature folders. This is not an out-of-the-box solution per se, but there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. And so when you want to add a new feature here, you go in and you open the folder, maybe add some infrastructure, open the controller, open the view model, open the view. Everything's in one place. Everything's literally in one folder. The view is with the view model, potentially in the same folder, or maybe just one folder removed. And it's a lot nicer, right? It's great, but it's still, probably too much, splunking around inside these folders. So if you really want to solve this problem in the view world where you're building pages or forms, Razor Pages is where it's at, right? With Razor Pages, you've got a view, and with the view, its associated action or actions are right there with it, right? You need a get in order to retrieve that view. Fine, it's right there assigned with that Razor file. You need to do a post. Fine, it's right there in the same place. The view model is that code behind, right? That's called a page model in the Razor Pages view. And so if you haven't checked out Razor Pages because you felt like it was just another version of web forms and it had, postbacks and that was causing PTSD, I can relate, but it's really not that. So you should get a fair shake. With Razor Pages, you've got like this awesome way of organizing all your stuff for page-based flows. Okay, so now let's talk about APIs. With APIs, you end up with what often occurs is a very large controller with a whole lot of different actions on it, a whole bunch of different dependencies. Your controllers don't really have a lot of cohesion because each one of those actions literally never calls any of the other actions. That would be crazy talk. And so you have, just a whole bunch of actions inside a controller that are only loosely related to one another. They rarely use all the same dependencies as one another. They rarely use the same binding models or API models. And so it's much, much better if you can kind of split these up so that your controller doesn't become 1,000 lines long and become impossible for you to manage. So we can fix that with some mediator. We can just go in and add, take something that looks like this. It's an individual action. It does some work. We can say, okay, well, here's a command. We're going to use mediator to send it. We can even simplify this further. We can just say, put mediator in a base controller, model bind it right to the command and send that. But now every single controller is just a mediator thing that sends something, right? And so we don't really need controllers anymore at that point. And so that's where endpoints come in. And if you use endpoints, they're going to look like this, right? You're going to have each endpoint corresponds to one action on a controller, and its models are right with it, right? So you can see in this animation that when you expand, you've got the request, you've got the result that go with it. Here's an example of what an endpoint looks like. It's got DTOs for the response and the request. It has just the responsibilities that it needs. The route and any optional information is right here. And you should almost never have to scroll at all when you're working with one of these. All right. There is no need for mediator with this. So if you're already using mediator, that's great. Everything is in one tiny NuGet package. The base types all inherit from controller. So at the end of the day, it is just a controller. So it's not some special black magic thing that I wrote. It's just a tiny wrapper over a controller. Now, some people argue, we can already do this. We can just keep our controllers small. It's true. But the thing is, you don't. And so constraints are generally a good thing in situations like this. It's also true you don't need private or protected on any of your variables because you could just use a convention and know which ones to use and which ones not to touch in your global space. But that's silly. We have those things for a reason. They improve our design. And I'm already over my time, but here's where you can go to find out more. Here's what a few people have said about this online. Check it out if you haven't. I hope you, if nothing else, you're intrigued. And if you have questions, feel free to let me know. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. Great job. I'm interested in endpoints. That sounds pretty slick. Nice job. So looking forward to checking that out. Cool. What we're going to go ahead and do a drawing for a free JetBrains license. So thanks to JetBrains, they sponsor our meetup by contributing a JetBrains license at each meetup. So go ahead and the cat is in the background. She's going to draw one for us. Yeah, if you haven't entered yet, now is the time. All right. So next we have Gerard Sychay. Gerard, welcome.
Hi. Can you hear me? Is this working?
I can hear you perfectly. Thanks so much.
Okay.
I would love to hear more about less stress and more shipping. Take it away.
Awesome. Yeah. I just realized this is, I think, the first time I presented where I can't see the audience's faces. So that's a surprise. Anyway, my name is Gerard Sychay. I work at Differential. Happy to discuss agile software development with you tonight. So Basecamp put out this Shape Up book about this time last year, maybe a little earlier. And during this time last year, we as a company went all in on Shape Up. And we began our first cycle in earnest on January 1st of this year. So it's been almost a year now of doing nothing but delivering software using the Shape Up process. So Shape Up has a lot of elements, a lot of details, of course. I'm going to focus on 3 core principles: shaping, bedding, and building. So in the traditional Agile approach, you may have a process or a meeting where you start designing wireframes, putting some business requirements together, creating something that you can start working on. That's basically what the shaping step is in this process. However, the output of shaping is a specific document, which they call pitch. And the pitch represents a good potential bet. And the reason we call it a bet, we'll get to later. But the pitch has these 5 elements. It has a problem definition. It has a solution, potential solution. It has any rabbit holes or risks. And it has no-goes, things that are off limits, such as we're not going to get a new database for this feature. And most importantly, it has an appetite. And note, in Shape Up, the terminology is very important. It's subtle but important. It's not an estimate, it's an appetite. So usually when you design these things, you say, well, I think this will take 6 weeks, or I think this will take 8 weeks. And in Shape Up, they flip it around a little bit. And you ask the stakeholder, well, what is this feature worth to you? Is it worth 4 weeks? Is it worth 6 weeks? And they might say, well, if it takes 4 weeks, then sure. But if it takes longer, then forget about it. That's their appetite. And once we have all this in place, we can start shaping the feature down to the appetite. And this gets into familiar things where what they call a fat marker sketch, where we create things that are concrete enough that we have something to work on, but not too concrete that it's limiting and starts blinding us to alternatives. So we have our pitch in hand, and then we go to the next step. And what is that? Well, it's not put in the backlog, that's for sure. Backlogs are dead in Shape Up. The Basecamp folks clearly hate backlogs, and for good reason. So what they found was that backlogs, you spend all your time prioritizing and curating, and for all of the ceremony, they deliver very little value to the project. And since you don't do 95% of things on the backlog anyway, why not just start every cycle or every iteration with a clean slate? And if something is important enough from, say, prior to the last cycle, then it will resurface and we can bet on it again. So I keep talking about this word bet. And we'll talk about that now. So you take the pitch to the betting table. The betting table is a meeting, but it's not the planning meeting. It's not a sprint planning meeting. So in an agile process, you may have a planning meeting and you look at your backlog, you take some stories down, you size them up, and you say, oh, this will fit in this sprint. This will take 2 sprints. And it's very tedious. And you're filling a box with developer time. It kind of sucks. So betting, again, it's subtle, but it's powerful. They flip it on its head, and it's more product oriented and less coding oriented. And you ask the stakeholder, what do you want to bet on? And just like if you go bet at the casino, you take a fixed amount of time or money, and if you succeed, you get a fixed payout in return, and the payout here being the feature. Now, if we've done our pitches right and we shape them right, your odds are going to be a lot better than if you were to go to the casino. But the key idea here is that when you bet, you're committing a certain length of time in return for the feature that you've asked for, and no more and no less. Again, it's subtle, but pretty powerful. Then we get to building. And this is my favorite part about the whole Shape Up book. If you take nothing away from me talking tonight, let it be this. The cycle length is 6 weeks, 6 weeks long. What they found was that, a 2-week iteration is too short to do anything. There's setup, there's tear down. By the time you get through it, you've had like 5 days of coding. And every feature takes longer than a 1 sprint. So then you're like, well, this is 2 sprints, this is 4 sprints. And it starts to vary. And what happens is you can't see the end of the thing, the end of the feature, until it's up close and you've got 2 weeks left. And you're either put against the wall or you just ship late. 6 weeks has been super powerful. We've used it, again, we've used this whole year. It's very predictable. It's long enough to do interesting things, but short enough such that you don't tell the client, well, this will take 6 months. And by the time you're done, you've forgotten what it is you've set out to build in the first place. You can see it on the horizon and they can anticipate it. And it's something that has been very successful. So 6 week, so the Shape Up cycle cadence looks like this. You actually have 6 weeks to code. And by the end of 6 weeks, the idea is that, it's done, like it's done. You have a releasable product. The last 2 weeks is the cool down, which is really cool. It gives the developer a break. It's a bit of a reward, really. It's a time that you can take time off, fix bugs. You can do the things that you want to do but never have time for, like refactoring, performance improvements. It's such a great rhythm. How do I get started? Well, you don't have to do the whole thing. You don't have to throw away everything. You can take the bits and pieces that you like. You can take your current iteration length right now and make it 6 weeks. That's a great place to start. And with that, I am done. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Gerard. That was fantastic. I am excited to learn more about this. I think having a built-in 2-week tech deck sprint, that sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much. Next up, actually, first of all, real quick here, we're going to do another drawing for a $50 Grubhub gift card, thanks to Elias and Group. They have donated that. So, Chad, if you can do a drawing for us there, that would be wonderful. Excellent. We've Mick Mulroy appears to have won. And now we are on to Lorien. Lorien, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Cool. I would love to hear more about APIs. They sound fantastic.
Okay, so this is sort of the opposite side of what Steve was talking about. So Steve was talking about how to do it when it is your website and your data and all of those manipulations, sending it between the front end and the back end. And with this, So basically, you've got your client that displays the data, a server that processes it, and some sort of database or data store. And we're all familiar with how that works. Problem is, sometimes you don't have all of that. All you have is the client. You're going to display data. You might do some manipulations in JavaScript or some sort of framework there. So with that, we need to get that data from somewhere. We need to send it back and forth. It needs to be stored somewhere, and we don't have access to that. So with that, that's where APIs get to be really handy. So simple definition, application programming interface. So it's meant for one application. You don't use this for your whole operating system. It's for programming. It's part of a larger program. It's not your whole thing. It's one segment of it. And it's an interface. And just like an interface in an object-oriented language, you know what it does, but you don't necessarily know how it does it. Now, granted, if you're following Steve's process and you're writing your own APIs for your own system, yes, you do eventually know how it does whatever it does, but you're not necessarily using your own APIs. You can use them from lots of other systems. And the result is that you can have either your client or their client, and either your database or their database, and then you've got this API in the middle as your mediator. So you can either write APIs that an outside system will consume, or you can have your system consume somebody else's APIs for data. So these are a couple places that I go when I look for APIs that I want to play around with. And this is why we're in the view of my browser and not just in sharing the presentation view of my slides. The NASA open APIs are a ridiculous amount of fun because space pictures, basically. And not as much fun. The CDC has a huge number of APIs. They're being used by a lot of people right now for COVID research, COVID tracking. Basically, they will spit out the data from wherever they're keeping it. They'll tell you what format it's in, and then you can do whatever you want. So I put together a couple of quick JS fiddles on these. The HTML is very basic, obviously for something that you were doing on your own. You'd put together a nice layout and some nice formatting. Let me see if I can bring this up, make it a little more readable. So this is just using some jQuery. Most of your popular frameworks are going to have some sort of wrapper for making these API calls. Different wrappers or plugins for different frameworks. So I'm just using simple jQuery wrapper. So we have here our NASA Images API. And this is literally their NASA images. We've got a query string with just our search term. I'm telling it I just want images and I want stuff that starts this year. And I just iterate over it, append some stuff into my HTML. And when I run it, comes back. And we have a caption, which is the title of our image, whatever NASA's internal ID is for that. And of course, the picture. Like I said, the NASA APIs are fun. CDC, not so much fun, but it's the same sort of thing. We do a get.json call with jQuery to their API that we found when we navigate through their page. This time I'm running a sort on the data. Again, really basic JavaScript. If you see the parsant, that's because this API sends everything back as strings, including numerical data. I don't know why they did that. That's the interface part of it. You don't know exactly how it's doing it. You just know what you're getting back. And then put it on the page, and I've got it in order from fewest cases by state to most cases by state. But yeah, if I go to this data set, it will actually tell me like what the columns are, what their types are, and I can go in and actually get the API link for that. So that is just my quick excuse to play around with a couple of other people's APIs and show you how they look on the page. And that is basically all I've got for my introduction here.
Thank you so much, Lorien. Those seem like some really cool APIs. Definitely love those Mars rover shots. They're really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Just a moment here. Thank you, Lorien. We are now going to do another giveaway. This time it's going to be a $50 Steam gift card, thanks to BrookSource. So we'll do that drawing right now. And we're prepping for Matt Eland. All right. We've got a new winner, Talk to Hoffman. Matt, come on in.
All right. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm great. It's good to be here.
Tell me about a new SaaS.
New SaaS.
Side.dev. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. So for those not familiar with the term, SaaS stands for Software as a Service. I've been working in the software as a service industry for about 15 years prior to becoming an educator. Right now, I'm an instructor at Tech Elevator. I love it. It's a lot of fun. And we're a software development boot camp. If you're not familiar with us, we're throughout the Northeast United States. We do full stack software development, education, mostly in Java and .NET. I teach .NET and JavaScript in our Columbus location, though we have a Cincinnati location as well. And I think a number of people in chat today are here through that as well, which is pretty cool. One of my favorite parts of my job is that I get to see all the really cool little side projects that our students get to build. And these are things that they choose to build just on their own and for fun and for experience. And I love that. But one of the harder things about 2020 for me is that with the kind of a slower economy, while our students are still very marketable and they'll get jobs, it takes them a little bit longer after graduation to get that job. And so we see our students start these side projects right after graduation, and they have such energy and enthusiasm for them, and they kind of peter out a little bit over the next few weeks. And then as the students are dealing with the slower economy, it becomes this low point for them as they're stop working on this and their opportunities are slowing up. And they do get those jobs, but I was trying to figure out what can I do to encourage them. There's a social aspect of that, and of course I'm doing whatever I can. But there's also a technological aspect of that. And so I decided that I was going to solve this problem of helping them with their side projects by building a side project myself. And so a couple months ago, I started building something I'm calling SideDev. And SideDev is envisioned as a free online social project management application built for individual developers, and particularly for newer developers, such as students and junior developers. But really, it's something I'm building to give to the community as a whole, to encourage people to build things socially, to collaborate with each other, to learn from each other, and to keep going even when things are a little hard. And so I set out with a target date of December 18th. And why December 18th? Well, that's when my current class of students graduates, just a couple weeks from now. And I set out to build a minimum viable product that I could deliver to them that they could use as the closed alpha once we start opening it up to a smaller subset of users. And so I said, well, what do I really need for people to be able to use this application? Well, I'm going to need the ability for people to create projects and to create tasks in those projects and update those projects and tasks. I'm going to need the ability for people to see the other projects people are working on, and for people to see your projects. And I'm going to need some basic things in place for later on down the road, because I'm not just stopping on December 18th. I'm going to keep going on into the new year on this and expand it and make it really shine, because I want to benefit not just these 18 students, though that's really the main factor for me in building it. So I want to build it something that's going to help a lot more people over time. And so I'm allowing people to track the technologies they're using on their projects with the hope that over time I'm going to be able to add more of like a recommender type of system like we see in Amazon, where you can say like, hey, projects that tend to use Vue, Vue Router, and ASP.NET Core, they also tend to use these technologies over here. Have you considered adding Vuex to your project? Now, I'm not going to get that part of it online on December 18th, but I want to be able to track the technologies that people are using so people can say, hey, what other projects use technologies like mine? And like I said, I've been working in software as a service for 15 years, and I've noticed something about these applications. They tend to be a little bit the same. And I think that side projects should be awesome. And so I said, well, I could make something in Bootstrap. I could make something that uses material design, but it's going to look like about everything else out there. And so I looked around and I thought, well, what do I love about programming? And I thought about all these games on Steam. So it's kind of funny that we just gave away the Steam gift card, honestly. All these programming games on Steam, these make programming fun, and it should be fun. It should be something that's exciting and you'd love to do it. And so I thought, well, let's take a look at these. And I started to notice some patterns, and a lot of them used like very similar kind of color palettes and things. So I was like, you know what? Wouldn't it be cool to build a professional software as a service application that looks like it came out of the 1980s? And so I prototyped this thing. I built it out in HTML and SCSS. This is based on some very customized a variant of Bulma. And I just kind of came up with this concept and like, hey, does this look right? Am I happy with how this looks? And when I spent a couple of weeks prototyping this, I'm like, yeah, you know what? This is pretty good. I think I want to move forward with it. And so I started building this thing out using the languages that I'm the strongest in. Vue.js, .NET Core, C#, things like that. And I started building this application to track the tasks related to the application itself. And so every day I'm in the application, I'm using it, and I'm updating my tasks. And as I'm in there and I'm working on it, I'm thinking, hey, I'm a really busy person. I've got maybe an hour or two a night I can devote to coding because teaching takes a lot out of you. So what is the one thing that I need to do today to move us forward towards our minimum viable product and hit December 18th? What's broken right now? What's not working the way I want it to? What feature do I need the most? Yeah, refactoring and testing and using advanced technologies are all important, but do they need to happen absolutely before I have a closed alpha? Maybe, maybe not. So every day I'm moving things forward a little bit on my deliverables, while also hopefully doing a little bit of cleanup, a little bit of refactoring, a little bit of testing, things like that. And so for me, the way I succeed in this is I use those little small increments of time and I deliver something meaningful to my product and I ship it regularly. And I will often break things right now, but it's okay. I got about 10 users and most of them don't hate me yet. So that's pretty cool. The hardest thing for me has not actually been the energy in keeping going with this thing. The hardest thing for me has been resisting my curiosity. There's a lot of things that we do in software development that are not development. We're setting up DevOps pipelines. We are end-to-end testing. We are doing planning and road mapping. We're investigating things like GraphQL and Gremlin and Azure and all these fancy things. And these are things that I really want to look at. And a lot of these things are really critically important if you're going to build an application that's going to serve thousands and thousands of users. And while I do dream that someday I might be able to serve that many people and find some way to pay for this at that scale, I'm not there yet. I am trying to serve a very small subset of users right now. And so my focus is I got to keep it simple. And any extra curiosity I'm redirecting into my reading and my courses and things like that I'm learning about. And so I focus on the things I'm good at. I focus on .NET Core and C#. I've actually been programming in C# since 2001, so I'm pretty good at it at this point. I teach Vue.js for a living, so I've been using that as my front end, and then I just have a boring old relational database management. I have some fancier things related to email management, but for the most sake, it's a very simple, small scale application that's going to work pretty well for maybe up to about 250 users or so. And that's fine for what I need right now. I want to open it up more in the spring, but for what I need right now, this is fine. And so just to flip it over to the focus on you, when you are building your side projects, you have to think about why are you building what you're building? There's a lot of different reasons to build a side project, and they're all perfectly valid. I've built a side project for almost all of these reasons here on the slide, and you can think of more that I didn't include on there. But one of these reasons is going to be more important to you than any other reason whatsoever. And it's going to drive your decisions. If you're trying to learn something new, then cool, go after that. If you're trying to have fun and your project gets boring, fine, stop it, move on to something else. You wanted to have something for a talk? Cool, build it, move on. For me, I'm building something to deliver. And so my focus is on executing and executing well and reliably. And I'm really happy to say that I'm going to hit my target date of December 18th. If you want to be involved in this kind of closed alpha in a couple weeks, please reach out to me on social media. There's the site's email address. You can also follow or even support on Patreon. I'm happy to answer questions on Twitter, and I'll be on the Zoom after the fact. But I hope you give it a shot. I hope you enjoy whatever side project you build. And I'm just thankful for CSC for having me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was really nice. I look forward to seeing more from side.dev. I can't wait to see what you do with that and how your students use it and all of that. So thank you so much. On that note, well, we have one last giveaway. It's a $50 Queen City card. Thank you to Vaco. So, Kat, if you could go ahead and draw that. Next up, we're going to have Josh Carroll. Hi, Josh. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. All right. You ready to go? Tell us about full stack serverless.
Yeah, so I completely forgot to come up with an intro slide. So this is my paint.net intro slide. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Josh Carroll. I'm the owner and kind of sole proprietor of a consulting company called AmpTech, cloud consultant. And if you want to, you can follow me at Twitter at JW Carroll. So we're here kind of to talk about the nightmare scenario where your boss comes to you and says, hey, I got this idea for an app. I think it's going to be huge. It's going to be $1 billion idea. It's going to IPO, and it's going to be called Grifter, right? So basically, you sign up for this thing, you can post grifts, and people can like it. And I think it's going to be worth $1 billion, right? So you get to work, you show him the mock-up, you come to him and you say, hey, I've got this cool mock-up, and you've even done a little bit of work in a React app where you've put together a few components, but it's not wired up to anything. The boss looks at it and he goes, this is amazing, ship it. He's like, I've got a sales meeting at the end of the day. So you start freaking out and you think, oh man, I've got this app, but it's not wired up to anything. There's no backend, there's no database, there's no authentication. Well, never fear, because you heard about this really cool new framework called AWS Amplify. It makes it really easy to spin up new apps. So first thing you do is, one, you cheat in that we're going to speed up time a little bit on this. But in AWS Amplify, you come in and you start off, you go in and you do amplify init in your repo so that you can start spinning things up. You say you're going to use Visual Studio, JavaScript, it's going to be React, and then you tell it you're going to use this AWS profile. You come in and boom, it starts spinning things up in the cloud for you. Just a couple of commands and you're off to the races. So once that's happened, the first thing you're going to notice is you've got this new folder called Amplify in your repo. And because we came into that, and we also have this AWS exports. We'll get to that in a second. So we've got our repo all initialized, but we need to actually add, like an API and authentication. So that's what we do. We come in, we say Amplify, add API. And we let the CLI do its thing. It starts spinning stuff up. We're going to call it the Grifter API. We want it to be GraphQL. We want authentication. We want people to be able to sign up with their username. And then we're done. And then we say, hey, we don't have a schema, but we're going to get one. So next thing we do is we drop in. We go to our GraphQL schema. And we say, okay, I want to drop in this quick little GraphQL schema. So we've got a grifter, and we can see it's got like a username and a name and the number of grifts it's liked. You've got a grift, which is, kind of like some other service that's out there. So it's got a body and a status, and it's got the grifter who posted it, and then you've got likes. So pretty straightforward, but it's got some other interesting things in here. You can see it's got authentication associated with it that says, hey, the owner of this can create, delete, and update, but anybody else who's authenticated should be able to just read only. And we've got that for each one of these. Okay, well, that's kind of cool. So now that we've got our API defined, at least in terms of models, what do? Well, glad you asked. We come in and we spin up and we say amplify push. Now, this is going to go through, it's going to find out and say, hey, look, you've got an API and you've got authentication, and do you want to go ahead and spin this up in the cloud? So we hit the button and it goes and starts spinning things up. It creates a bunch of resources in the cloud, gets everything ready for us. And then now that we've got an API spun up in the cloud, we can come in and we can actually configure our app to use that. Remember me talking about this AWS exports that's automatically generated for us? Well, now if we come into our app, and all we have to do to wire up our app now is come in, we import Amplify, import AWS exports, and then we have this with authenticator, because remember, we need authentication. So how do we make sure our app is now authenticated? Well, we just wrap it in this higher order component for React. So now, boom, I've got authentication in place. So if we come in and we let the React do its thing and compile, if it compiles. All right, I'm a little over on time, so instead of waiting for this to finish compiling, oh, hey, there it goes, it compiled. All right, so you can see we're running locally here, and I can come in, I can log in. And boom, you can see I've got this cool thing. I can come in and say, here's a new grift. I can post that, but something's missing. It's not doing real time for me. Well, never fear. If we want to be able to come in and have this do some real time updates because of the API, all we got to do is come into our list of grifts, add some real time subscriptions. And now, if I come in and start clicking buttons, you'll see that it's actually updating in real time. All right, now, last but not least, we want to publish this thing out to the cloud. So we'll hit a button and we'll say add hosting. We're going to let that go through, and then we're going to say publish once we've done that. That's going to push everything out to the cloud. And just to show you guys that I'm not completely making this up, this app is actually published on this URL right here. I don't know if I can push that in the chat somehow. I put that one over on a private chat, but anyway, if someone can post that in there, or somebody wants to see this. But anyway, so that is AWS Amplify. You can basically push, full apps out. If you were to pull this down and build it yourself, you'd be able to get this entire application with a database, with authentication, with real-time updates, all in the cloud, hosted for you without a lot of effort.
Very cool. Thank you, Josh. That is really well done. So everybody's going to come and crash your app, right?
No, it should work.
Awesome.
Hopefully everybody will go in.
That'd be so cool. Thank you so much, Josh. All right. Finally, that is the end of our lightning talks for today. I just want to extend a massive thank you to our speakers. I know the amount of work that goes into those lightning talks. I know that our attendees have really appreciated what you've had to share today. And I just can't thank you enough for your participation. I also want to thank our attendees today. It has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you joining us. It's not quite over yet. There's still some fun to be had on Zoom, so don't leave just yet. And then also want to say thank you to our sponsors, BrookSource, Eliason, Vaco, and JetBrains for sponsoring today. And I want to ask you all to join us on Zoom for the after meetup happy hour. So we look forward to talking to you there, and hope to see you next month at our January meetup. Take care, everybody.